Welcome to Define Your Path with DocV, bringing you real talk with global thought leaders to inspire hearts and minds for sustainable breakthroughs and profitability for your life and business. Here's your host, DocV.
Hi, I'm Dr. Virginia LeBlanc, also known as DocV, the Pivot Maestro. Welcome to the Define Your Path podcast for thought leaders, change agents, legacy builders, and those seeking to define their own path into purposed entrepreneurship. We are all about transforming perspective, as well as inspiring and motivating you to think without a box, to define your path by exposing you to global thought leaders across industries on how they successfully define their path in life and business. Define Your Path is all about truth, transparency, and love to help you navigate the waters of your life and put you back in business. Today's spotlight is with Andrea Cox. I am so excited to have her here with us. Andrea is the founder of Cox Compassionate Planning Concierge, also known as Preplan First, a company that helps families create a plan years in advance of a loved one passing away and helps at the time of a death. After working with families for almost 7 years, Andrea saw the need to change what she was doing in order to be able to reach more families. The notion that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result hit home for Andrea. It was that time to do something different thing that happened in her life. She decided to write a book and start her own business so she could take her expertise to the next level by reaching more families virtually and educating families through her book before it was too late. Andrea is passionate about educating others on the topic of death. It's a hard subject, folks, to help you normalize this taboo topic so that families can have a more positive death experience with peace of mind. She truly believes that when families talk about death and put a plan in place today, it guarantees peace of mind in the future. Having an exit plan takes away the chaos, confusion, family breakdown, and possible financial burdens that could lead to ruin on loved ones during a difficult time. Currently, Andrea is licensed in both Alberta and British Columbia, Canada, two gorgeous places, to sell prepaid funeral home packages and holds a double license in Alberta, one with the Alberta Funeral Regulatory Board. And Andrea continually learns more about the uniqueness of death with various end-of-life professionals, both in Canada and the U.S., so she can be the light to such a dark topic that no one likes to talk about. Death is a part of life that we all will experience one way or another. So let's talk. I love it. I love it. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So excited to have you, to spotlight you and what you're doing. Such a needed topic, such a needed service. So let's just jump in. We look forward to hearing your story and how you faced your fears to love the skin you're in and pivot into pursuing your passion and soul purpose in this way. So in our podcast, we love to keep it simple. So here are 2 questions for you. How have you defined your path? 1. And 2, how do you want to help others define theirs? So the spotlight is yours. How did you define your path?
Wow, good question. It's interesting because my background is in HR, did that for years. And, I got laid off and I got introduced to this company where we were selling prepaid funeral packages. And we were going to union members' homes to explain to them their options for these funeral packages. And I went to this one gentleman's home and he said to me that, he doesn't need a funeral package because he's not going to die. And I thought to myself, okay. And he was so serious, right? Mm-hmm. And I went to another. So when we went to homes, we would always ask, do you have a will? Do you have a will? And people kept on saying no. And I went to this young couple's home and they said yes. And I was really confused because most people say no and they're young. So why do they have a will, right?
Right.
And they explained to me that, they had a close friend who passed away unfortunately by domestic violence. Mm. And because of that, they got their wills done because the children were at the funeral with social services. And that's when they realize that they need to put something in place in case something happens to them. So that's pretty much how I realized that there's a problem and how are we going to fix this, right? So then I started to do, I was working with them for a while, and then I switched with another company selling prepaid funeral packages with various funeral homes in Canada. And while I was doing that, I realized that there's missing pieces, because this is a topic people don't want to talk about. And it wasn't easy to sell the package because we're not going to die, right?
Right.
So we all think. So we don't want to, do that type of work. So I found the need to more educate people. So then we would do web seminars then. Once COVID came, it was webinars. And, there's Clubhouse, for those who know what Clubhouse. And then there's, so that's pretty much how I more so got into it. But the more that I was in it, the more I wanted to learn more. And when I got my double license in Alberta, it's funny because when they told me about it, I was like, but, this is not even for me. And because I wasn't really interested. Like when I first started this, like seriously, I wanted to do like the bare minimums. I didn't want to sell caskets. I didn't want to sell urns. I just want the bare minimum just to kind of help people. But of course, the more that I was learning, the more that I was like, oh my goodness, people really don't understand this, right? And of course, when someone passes away, it's that huge confusion. They don't know what to do. So the more that I was doing it and the more that I was able to help families when something happens, my passion is more educating so that there's a plan in place before something happens, right? And obviously the more that people know in advance, and it's all about our legacy as well. And, although we don't like to talk about death, and so I have to bring up this gentleman's name. Oh my goodness. And I just forgot his name. He died in the States, and he's the controversial gentleman that passed away last week. Oh my goodness. And he's the relationship coach. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't recall.
Samuels.
But we can circle back.
Yeah, we'll circle back on that. And, to some, he would have left a positive legacy, and to some, he would have left a negative legacy. And the question is, what legacy do we want to leave behind, right? And I'm a true believer is that we put a plan in place today for peace of mind tomorrow, because tomorrow's not guaranteed, right? So we could live the best life once we actually put something in place in advance. So this is where the book came in. So of course the book came in because, you have these conversations with families, and it's one thing when they come out to our events, but it's another thing for them to actually action it, right? So the book is a workbook, and it's a book for people to get information and do the workbook as well.
Oh, wow. Brilliant.
So yeah, so that's pretty much how I pretty much got into what I do. So I just find that because there's not many of us who educate people on this, it's just my passion just to try to get the word out more and more that unfortunately this is going to happen. And you know what? The nice thing about it is that when we do these in advance, you can laugh. You can have such a good time. It's such a different atmosphere and a different experience when you do this in advance, as opposed to there's a crisis, someone has passed away, and you're now trying to piece things together when you really don't even know what your first name is. Do you know what I mean? Because it's just a really stressful time.
Absolutely. And it's such a needed subject. It's a certainty in life, right? But we're so fearful about talking about death and pre-planning. And situations, that's a real life situation that you gave an example of earlier of, children being at their parents' funeral with social service because there's no one, there's no written guidance as to where that child should go. So it's so important. I love also what you said, your passion is in education, but you found this niche that really just fits you. And you obviously have a gift for it. And when you talk about it, the passion comes out. I want to ask you this, how did you pivot from human resources, which is funny because I also have a human resources background.
Do you?
I do. And girl, that's like, we can have a whole nother, I'll invite you to my Candid Conversations TV show. We could talk about it there.
Right.
But anyway, but how did you connect the dots or what led you to that? Or do you find that, that helped to inform also your compassion for people and making sure that they're planning first?
Well, really, I loved staffing. So I really did love what I did. And I, got laid off and I was looking for work. And it's just interesting because even now, like when people are just like, how did you get into this business?
Mm-hmm.
Or this one guy told me, you and your dead people business. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like I'm trying to educate people before that happens. Right. But
Right.
you know what? At the end of the day, God has a plan for all of us.
Yes.
And it's not about us. He wants to use us. And I really believe that he just chose me to do this. And this is why I do what I do. And I absolutely love it. And it's, although I've been working with a company for almost 4 or 5 years, and since I wrote the book, I had to, pretty much incorporate a business, which is just because I love to be creative.
Yes.
And
yes.
now I can do what I want to do to kind of build this up. Right. So that's just how it works when God's hand is all in it. So
I love it. I love it. So you've kind of alluded to, a little bit of how you help others define their path. Can you, let's talk about that. So how can people access your service, and how do you go about just the conversation alone, breaking them into that?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing is that, in the book, it has, oh my goodness, the book has so much information, and it's on Amazon, on all platforms. And as I mentioned earlier, the book is to help us to get as much information as possible, because when we think about it, it's not just about us. Right. It's about those around us. Because if our loved ones, our parents, siblings, aunt and uncle, cousin do not have a plan in place, it falls on those who are left behind. Yes. So it's important to start having these uncomfortable conversations, telling your children, telling your spouse, if anything happens to me, go underneath the bed. If you go inside the suitcase, you're going to see the insurance, you're going to find all that information. So it's just having the conversation and being the example first. So I try to encourage people, you be the example, and it'll be easier to get those to get on board with you so that you'll be the guide, right? So, and of course, through the book, it helps people to have an exit plan in place. We do seminars, we do seminars and webinars. And now that I have the book, we'll be building out a workshop so people can use the workbook. So at the end of the day, when something happens, the family has a guide that they have. So we'll take away all that confusion, that chaos, the family breakdowns, and the list kind of goes on. And it's interesting because I used to say that, sometimes I wish I was God. Okay. And what I mean by this is, I want to put a family in a room, bring back the person who has passed away, and let them tell that person what mess came about from what happened. And because a lot of these relationships with our families, they're not even mendable. Like, they will never be back together again because of what has happened, right? Just the mess that comes about. So with that book, it just really helps people to move things here on a piece of paper. The book talks, there's a section in there to write, letters for your loved ones. It's, there's a step-by-step guide to help your family in the first 24 hours. There's lots of different stories in there to help people to understand that they need a plan in place because they don't want to be that statistics of the families being a mess, right? So that's the purpose of people to read it and understand their why. Because we don't talk about this. We don't learn this stuff in school, right? So, and we just don't talk about it. But yet, if something happens, we have to, we plan and we celebrate births and we celebrate anniversaries and weddings and birthdays. And, the list kind of goes on. But then when someone passes away, in some cases, people don't even do anything because there's so much things that happens when we go to the funeral home. There's so many decisions to make. It's even more difficult if you have a family member who was terminally ill, right? And that's tiring. You're working, you have kids, and then you're rushing to the hospital, and the list kind of goes on, and then they pass away, and now you need to plan a celebration of life. You know what I mean? Some people, they mentally just cannot do it. So the difference of when there is something that's in place, that is done, they go to the funeral home, it's all taken care of. And it's just less on our family so they can just grieve and start their grief process healthily.
Yes, exactly. And that's the key, healthy, because the grief process is already, like you said, if they were dealing with a condition, and it wasn't just spur of the moment, of course, is traumatic. But, even just preparing yourself for that final day,
Right.
is just, you're already dealing with trauma. And to have to
Yes.
add that pressure and
Yes.
stress on top. I have personally experienced that a couple of times with family members who, I've stepped in and helped to plan things. My father, when I was a caregiver for him, we did those things. But what you've described, what you provide for people, I want to get my hands on that, Andrea, because it sounds wonderful. It's brilliant. And literally covering all the bases, even down to writing the letters. So important, so important. I think the relationship coach you were talking about was Kevin Samuels. What was the point you wanted
That's
to make about that?
exactly
Mm-hmm.
who I was talking about. Thank you.
Mm-hmm, no worries.
Kevin Samuels. And what it is that, this is a gentleman that, if you look at what his goal and what his vision was to help the Black community, and, he's a little bit abrupt, you know what I mean? But,
Mm-hmm.
people, I guess it depends on where you are, but you could still learn a lot from him is what I'm saying. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who did not really like him. So when you think about when we found out that he passed away from Thursday and all the negativity that came about from it, and it's such a diverse, but the question is, what legacy do you want to leave behind? And although so many people have so much negative things to say about him, a lot of people have a lot of positive things at the same time. So it depends on who it is. So the questions that we need to ask ourselves, what legacy do we want to leave behind? Because that starts today, because we don't know what tomorrow looks like. So we can't, legacy is about, what we've learned in the past and to bring it forward. Yes. And that's how our legacy works. We can't just do our legacy today. It starts yesterday, right? So absolutely, what legacy do we want to leave behind?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, that carries on, for those who are left behind and, who will come, to just look at the example that we set. And what we, did we depart here in the case of, dealing with death? Did we depart here leaving confusion and chaos and, or was it a wonderful celebration or homegoing, as we like to say in some communities, when we celebrate, that departure, from the body and, and the return of the soul, So, so no, I love what you're doing. I love the work that you're doing. So let's talk about also, truth and transparency. Have you personally, I know you gave the example of the couple who you interviewed, but have you personally had experiences where, you or your family members, is that also kind of a driving force behind what you do now?
It's interesting because I have not, but I've been born in the church and there's so many people that have passed away, especially during COVID. So I'm able to help people through it. Do you know what I mean? And it's interesting because most people who do are end of life professionals, because of their experience, they've now come into this. But for some reason, there was just a need, and I don't know if it was the timing or I don't know what it was, but just. I really think God just had a plan in my life, because I just never would have thought, like if someone told me like years ago that this is the type of work I would be doing, I would have laughed at them and probably rebuked them at the same time, because I wouldn't do it. And when I think back to when I started doing this work and I wanted to really get more information, and I would go to cemeteries and I'm doing research and my mom would be like, well, what did you do today? I'm like, I went to the cemetery. And she looks at me like, by yourself? Because of course my parents, they're from the Caribbean. So, this whole death thing is like, they want no part of it. Right. And the first time that I drove a coach, so it's the hearse, we call her grandma. And I drove the hearse for that. And when they called me and asked me like, did you want to drive the hearse? And yet, I said yes, not thinking about what that meant, right? Because they call me during the week. I said yes, and you go on during the week. So it wasn't until I got there the day and we put grandma in and I go into, and they're like they gave me the keys, and I'm looking around like, who's coming in here with me? And it was just me, and I sat there like, what am I doing in here? And then I was like, grandma, anyhow you move. I'm going to leave you and the coach on the side of the road because I am not. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was so freaked, right? But
yeah.
And I think it's because of how I was raised. Like, my mom has the biggest fear. So you have this fear that kind of grows with you. So as I said, if anybody told me this is what I would have been doing, oh yeah, I would have said, oh no, this is not for me. But this is where I am.
It's so funny, but so you just hit on a word that, in our last few minutes, I want to explore this a little bit, because I think it's so interesting what you said. You never thought about this. You never planned to go down this path. You just started connecting the dots when life happened to you. You pivoted, this opportunity presented itself. And as you took advantage of it, you activated the whole fight response as opposed to the flight response, and face life, face your fears and all of that. So a lot of us who have found our way to what I call purposed entrepreneurship, that is a soul calling,
yes.
And it's something that just draws you to it, and it, when you find it, and it often comes from, pain points, something that has happened, and, or, you identify so closely, as in your case, with a pain point that, it awakens and activates that soul calling. You just know that you know that you know. And that's what I feel like I hear you saying, that's how you started connecting the dots, and look at the volume of work and what you're doing now that you've produced,
and you said an interesting thing there about the pain point. And I think about, I've been recently finally divorced. We won't get into that. But what I'm saying is that I remember there's a point I was in my bed and I said, God, if you can use anything, you can use me. And sometimes we need to be careful what we say because it's... So, I went through, but I feel like I had to go through that to where I am now, because I'm sure if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't have probably said yes to where I am now. Right. So what you said earlier makes so much sense. Absolutely. You nailed it.
Yeah. And we just have to be willing and ready to pivot. Once we figure that out, that just because we were on this one path, you were on a path in HR, you probably thought that was, that was your calling. That was your purpose, and then life happened and, and you had your aha moments. And you've come to realize that, that was just, actually, let's back up. I'm not going to put words in your mouth. How did you get on the HR journey? I have a thought in my mind, because most of us get on a path that others place us on, or people suggest, oh, you'll be good at that. It's a part of that just whole educational, upbringing, conditioned thinking and response.
Right.
How did you get on?
So how I got into it. So growing up, like junior high, well, no. I think it started high school. I used to work with employment agencies every summer and during the holidays. Okay. And I lived in England for 2 years, did a work holiday visa, and I came back. And I was working with a health and benefits with like Manulife Financial. And I was working there, and my recruitment agents, like my recruiter who places me different places, interesting enough, she was leaving and she referred me to her position.
Okay.
Had no experience, just because I guess who I was and everything. And that's how I got into HR doing staffing. And I absolutely loved it. Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So you loved it. You enjoyed it, as did I. But it's funny because you said a key word there. Someone referred you, and I don't believe anything happens happenstance. I wholly believe that was a part of your journey, my journey. It just adds to and informs the skill sets that make you even more able and capable of doing what you're doing now.
Right.
No, that's just brilliant. Fascinating story shared. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you for being on our spotlight today.
Thank you for having me. Great conversation.
Absolutely. And audience, be sure to follow Andrea on social media. Please, Andrea, tell our audience, how can they connect with you? Is there a website preference?
So our website is Preplan First. That's PREPLAN. First, FIRST.com. I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Andrea Cox. That's where you can find me. And of course, to order a copy of the book, Amazon, yes. All platforms.
Awesome. Thank
you.
So
oh my goodness, called Final Departure. I'm sorry, have I said the title of the book?
Actually, I don't think either one of us. So please say.
Oops.
Final Departure. Is that
Final
right?
Departure. Yes.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. And audience, if you happen to forget that or didn't catch it, go back, listen to the whole show, or go to our platform for the Define Your Path podcast, and you'll be able to connect with Andrea there as well. And be sure to visit our virtual home to see what we're up to at definingpaths.online. I am DocV, the Pivot Maestro, and always your corner woman. Be true to you and define your path. I'll see you on our next episode. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
You've been listening to Define Your Path with DocV. To learn how to see with true vision and define your path, visit definingpaths.online/true-vision.